the new chair of the SEC. She wants to make sure she has her ducks in a row. And that's the right thing to do. You know, we've already had the experience once. You may remember under the earlier administration, we started out with charges against Bear Stearns.
It went nowhere.
Didn't make it stick. That's the worst possible place to be in.
Well, if you read The House of Cards, I don't know if you've read that by Cohen on that, and I had an opportunity to read it, and then you know that the previous administration brought an action against Bear Stearns, you're just waiting for the convictions.
That's right.
And then when you find out that they couldn't make it stick, you start losing your hair.
That's right.
On that. So
that's right.
A new SEC chairperson who's going to get a new legal team in there and hopefully go at this in a much more constructive manner.
That's right.
May give people the satisfaction of seeing some accountability, is what you're saying.
She may. And you know, we always want to remember, coming out of the savings and loan crisis in the late 80s, early 90s, there were very different consequences when those banks failed. Now, they were smaller banks, but there were lots of them. The bank was wiped out. There were no survivors. You know, the checking accounts were moved someplace else. Depositors didn't lose any money, but the bank itself, the savings loan itself, was wiped out. And the second thing was there were investigations almost immediately, because the basic position of the regulators back then was, if you went from here to here in the space of just a few weeks, you probably weren't following the rules. There's either what got you up there or what knocked you off. Something has to be wrong here. And in fact, people went to jail. People had civil judgments against them. A lot of CEOs who'd been riding high during the boom years on the savings and loans ended up falling low.
Well, this sort of gets us into the too big to fail issue, doesn't it? You know, where you say, so why didn't that happen in this case? And the answer back to us when people raised it was, well, they were just too big to fail. If we did the same type of thing that the FDIC did with the banks and the savings and loan, it would just be terrible for the whole system, and it would freeze up credit, and nobody would be able to do any business, and they were too big to fail. Do you believe in too big to fail?
So I'm going to say two parts to too big to fail. The first one is, you know, there's a place between completely knocking them down. I understand the point. You know, the hikers are all tied to each other. One falls off the mountain, they may pull everyone else. But there's a difference between that and giving them money, no strings attached. There are places in between those two. It's possible to take a ding, right? To say, look, your shareholders are going to be wiped out. Your top management has to be replaced. You've got to come up with a new business plan that you're going to explain to the American people who have just invested in you. So I think there's room in between. You get all the money and we just knock you off the cliff. But the second point, and I think this is the far more important point, this is what Congress is up to right now, this week, next week. It's going to be about what the rules are going forward. And one of the, in my view, the two most important problems we've got to solve. One is too big to fail, how we credibly say, you mess up bad enough, you're just like every other business in America. You can go down because we figured out a way that you won't bring everybody else down. That's the critical part. And at the other end, for me, it's the consumer agency. We got to get right with credit at the household level.
So this is a good segue into that, because the House has passed its bill.
Yes.
Back in December of 2009. It's a good bill. And you know, Barney Frank, our own Barney Frank, who was much maligned during this process when people were upset. And there's a guy that's been slaving away and working hard to try and get this right. And because he was in the spotlight and people were angry and they were just lashing out, they all somehow thought, well, let's go after this guy. But he's been doing, I think, and you can tell me whether you agree, as the cop. You know, I mean, he's been working hard at this thing, and he's, you know, he put a bill through a House, and I hate to say this because they're all my colleagues or whatever, but not everybody wants to work this thing the way I think it should be worked. I'd be tightening the screws even tighter than they were. Bonnie would be too. It's a no-brainer to most of us. You know, there were serious mistakes made. These banks on Wall Street really got carried away. They were doing things that I think were disreputable. And so why wouldn't you regulate? Why wouldn't you set reasonable rules of the road on that? Well, not everybody down here agrees. So Bonnie had to do a considerable amount of work to get the House bill through, and it's still a good piece of legislation. It obviously doesn't have everything he would want or I would want, but it's good. You know, and it does some of those protective things on that. So one of the parts it has in there is the Consumer Protection, the Consumer Financial Protection Agency. and you and I have had our own discussions on that about whether it takes credit card companies tough enough on that. I think that we could do a little bit more, but I think you're much more strategic on that. Is let's get it in place.
This is good.
And give it. So tell us about the Consumer Financial Protection Agency in the House bill and why it's good.
Okay, so let's start with where the world is right now, because there are two pieces in the world that have to be fixed. The first one is there are 7 regulatory agencies in Washington that have a piece of consumer financial regulation. I mean, think about this. We have 7 different bureaucracies that own some piece of Truth in Lending and Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and right across. That gives us a bloated bureaucracy that is largely ineffective. It is under the control of agencies for which consumers and consumer banking is not their first mission. And in the case of the federal banking regulators, under the control of agencies that are really see their job as to protect the banks, not from those mean and tough consumers. So this is something that doesn't work. The idea behind the Consumer Financial Protection Agency is we take those 7, scissor them out. This is going to be one of the first agencies that comes with a pair of scissors. Scissor them out from the other 7 agencies, slim it down, put it in one agency, and now make an agency that's going to be responsive, accountable. One person has to come into Congress twice a year and say, well, here's what's going on. You can grade us. You know,
right.
Here are the good parts. Here are the parts maybe we haven't gotten to yet, but there's some accountability. So that's number one. Number 2 is how the industry itself has changed. So in 1980, Bank of America's credit card, 700 words long, a little over a page. Today, the average credit card in America more than 30 pages long and filled with terms like LIBOR linked and, just crazy stuff. That legalese, nobody can read it, fine print, tiniest little print possible, pale gray. Because the idea, the profit model has shifted from, okay, I think you're worth it, or I don't, I'll figure out an interest rate, you know what the deal is, you can shop it around and see what the comparison is. That model is gone. Now I will pretend to lend to you at 7.9% and know that where I'm really going to make my money is in the tricks and traps hidden in the fine print. This agency is designed to say, enough. We're going to get these things down to readable contracts, 2-page credit card agreements, 2-page mortgage agreements. We can see them, we can read them.
Plain English.
Plain English. And look, now you make a decision with your family. This is how much it's going to cost you. This is what the risk is. They put it straight up front. You make the decision. You want to do it, you don't want to do it. If you want to do it, then you're bound. Personal responsibility here. If you don't want to do it, walk away. But nobody gets fooled in the deal. And that's what I want to see happen. And better yet, if you believe in markets, you can compare the first offer, the second offer, the third offer, the fourth offer, and say, oh, that's the one that's the cheap one. And that's going to make markets work and drive down prices for everyone.
Well, you would hope so. I mean, you were very helpful. And we put together the bill in the House to get rid of some of these tricks and traps in there. But the reason we need the agency is they'll try to come up with new tricks and traps the minute you do that. One of the arguments I had made on my credit interest cap on that was the minute you fix those tricks and traps that exist today, they'll try to make up for the lost profit on those things by jacking up their interest rates. And they did.
And they did.
And they did.
They did.
So your contention is that this new agency will be able to rein that in.
The idea
and
is...
I'm hopeful, but I've got the backup plan
I hear
in
you.
case on that. Because these guys are incorrigible.
That's right.
And they will just keep changing the tricks and traps and move on from there. So that's a good piece of the bill in the House. We're proud of it. The Senate is maybe moving away from it. Where are they going? Because I know the industry hates it.
Oh, the industry hates this. You know, the industry announced, after this bill came out, they announced multiple times last summer that they would kill the consumer agency. The Wall Street banks said, and they felt so bulletproof that their lobbyists were quoted in the newspapers saying, we're going to kill that one.
Well, they